Liberate IT is an Oracle NetSuite solution provider that has been servicing Australian and New Zealand companies since 2011.
Welcome to the latest of the Liberate IT webinar series. I am your host, Andrew Liniger. It's great to have you join us today. If you ever need to reach out to me, my email address is there. Reach out for all things enhancements and changes and improvements to NetSuite. Love to help you out. Okay, today I'm going to quickly go through a few updates from our side, a few updates from the NetSuite stand. We're going to go through the advanced bill of materials and then back to me to wrap up. As always, we are recording today's session. We'll make that available on our YouTube channel and on our website. So if for whatever reason you miss it or you need to drop out, don't worry, you can catch us up shortly. There is about a week's delay before we're able to get that up online, so just be patient. Today, we welcome, as always, lots of questions from you. Please use the Q&A function. Don't use the chat. I won't be monitoring that. So put in your questions for Simon as they come to you, and I'll ask him those questions as they come up. So happy to do that. Okay, our user event in person is in Auckland, 14 March. So that's nearly upon us. And that means we won't be doing any webinars during March because we're focusing on that. In April, we will be presenting some advanced inventory features, including the supply chain workbench, and we're getting the team from Ready Freight to come in and discuss what they have available as well. From NetSuite end, 2023.1 is upon us. If you haven't already, and it's available to you, do a request to release preview so that you can do some testing, primarily focus around those areas of your business that you've had some customization. In the release notes and the sneak peek blogs, actually the sneak peek blogs only, you might see some information about some new Suite apps that are available. I think it's worth mentioning that whenever NetSuite release a Suite app in relation to a new release, that they typically wait for everyone to be on that new release before the Suite app is sent out to market. So if you're in the first phase of the update and you're wondering why you haven't got access to the Suite app, usually you're going to have to wait about 2 or 3 months. So just be patient with that. That's a signature play by NetSuite for some reason in the last probably 3 or 4 releases now. So do keep an eye out for that and keep checking for those. Also, NetSuite, if you're undergoing through an audit and your auditors are asking you for some compliance reports from NetSuite, whether it's infrastructure or any one of these listed, you can now access these yourself. You don't need to come through to me anymore. Sadly, you can just go into the NetSuite Account Center and request them directly from there. Now, if you haven't got the NetSuite Account Center set up, we're happy to help out. Just reach out to our support desk and Josh will be more than happy to take you through how to set those up. Okay, NetSuite have been releasing new modules, particularly towards the end of last year. They include NetSuite My Account. So a quick process to get you up and running with this. It's about 10 days to activate it. And really it's for your end customers to log in and check things like how far away are my items to be shipped? What are my invoices that are outstanding that I need to pay? All that sort of thing, logging support cases, etc. So if that sounds of interest to you, do reach out. I can help you out with that. I did a webinar on that end of last year as well, so do check that out on our website. Suite Commerce is a templated approach to a new website integrated with the NetSuite platform, B2B only at this stage. Lots of themes and extensions to choose from. Love to talk to you about that if you're currently exploring a new website. Smart Count is another new feature. So it's really for stock takes in a warehouse with a mobile device. And some things to note, you obviously need the advanced inventory feature or module for that to work. So you need to be licensed for that, but most customers are. And if you've actually got stock, And the other thing is you need to be a Suite Success account or have OneWorld enabled as well. But if you're unsure about any of that, do reach out. That just streamlines the whole stock take process. It's really cool. Talking of really cool, if you're after some better insights into NetSuite, NetSuite have leveraged some of the Oracle data analytics and made that available to NetSuite customers. So this is brand new right at the end of last year. It's hot off the press. Would love to talk you through some of the information and insights you can get from the business. What I like about this is it doesn't restrict itself just to NetSuite data. You can access a range of other data that's in your company, and you can consolidate that into one spot to make some better decisions. So one of the webinars that I saw in that, what I really liked was that you could obviously measure your ad spend with Google AdWords, and then see how that then translates into online sales through your e-commerce platform, and see if you're actually getting the return on investment that you think you might be. So that's just one example of being able to bring together some disparate data for better decision making. If you have the company-wide Learning Cloud Support Pass, in addition to the Liberate team, who do 2 webinars each month, the NetSuite team do their own. These are behind the paywall of the Learning Cloud Support Pass, but if you've got that, here are some upcoming webinars that the NetSuite team have in store for you. Usually focused around reporting and finance. So if that's you, do check that out. Okay, that's enough from me today. I'm going to introduce Simon Bernard. Most of you probably know Simon. Simon's going to take us through the advanced bill of materials. G'day, Simon. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for that.
My pleasure.
I'll just share my screen, and then we can go into a quick presentation, and then we'll get into NetSuite and kind of show advanced bill of materials and how it works, and some examples along the way. So do bear with me a second. Just share screen.
That's amazing. Right now, we are finding that NetSuite are, I guess, looking to sunset what they call a standard bill of materials, and wanting to have everyone migrate eventually to advanced bill of materials. And so we thought we'd planned this for quite some time ago, but it seems to be quite pertinent now. Some of the customers we're finding are being asked to migrate across, which is not a complicated process, but we thought, hey, this is great timing in terms of getting a better understanding of what is this advanced bill of materials. So thanks, Simon. I really appreciate it.
Cool. We'll just go through a quick presentation deck, and then we'll get into the slides. So as Andrew mentioned, my name's Simon. I've been a NetSuite consultant for about 10 years, and I predominantly specialize in the manufacturing space. So I'm working in manufacturing companies and using NetSuite to streamline how they get things through production and out the door to customers. So Andrew briefly mentioned the standard bill of materials. For those who don't know, that is a feature in NetSuite where you have an assembly item where you list the components, and that is, in theory, your bill of materials for every product you ever make, regardless of where you manufacture it and which locations you use. And it doesn't support multiple BOMs, which we'll see in a second. As of 23.1, the support for that feature will end, and NetSuite will recommend you that you upgrade to the advanced bill of materials. So if you don't do that now, you really should be doing that, because it's no longer supported. So if you did get errors using a standard bill of materials, then NetSuite won't support it, and we don't really have many things to do to help that. If you do turn it on, which you should do, and it's free of charge, then it will automatically convert all your single BOMs into advanced bill of materials, and then you're automatically for you. So there's no work for you to do as the end user. You just have to turn it on, and then it will create a bill of materials against an assembly item. But in theory, you could add 2 or 3 more bill of materials if you wanted to. And that's as of this release. So if you're not in that release yet, because there's people get upgraded over a period of a month or 2, you could do it before the release, or you could just do it after the release. It's whatever suits you, really. So advanced bill of materials. The core essence of it really is to have more than one BOM against an assembly item. And there could be a number of reasons of why you do that. So let's imagine that you produce something in Auckland and you use ingredients 1, 2, and 3, but that same item you could produce in Christchurch and you use a very different set of ingredients for whatever reason. You still produce one item, but depending on when you manufacture it, you could use a different list of ingredients. And we'll go into an example of where that could be used in a moment. What we can also do using advanced bill of materials is to define yields, which means that if I lose some production, if I lose some of the material in the manufacturing process, you can build that into the tolerance of the bill of materials. So you'll use more to make the product, but you've allowed an element of yield from, let's say, the 1 meter beam you're going to use. You'll use 85% actually so we'll go into that in a second. And a slight add-on to that, we'll actually look at routings. So routings in the NetSuite sense is how do I capture labor and machine costs and add that into the finished cost of the product that I'm manufacturing. There are a number of ways to do this, but routings, in my experience, has a number of different ways that we can get that in a more efficient way. And there are some added benefits to using manufacturing routings in terms of planning work centers and also changing the priority of which work orders get manufactured first and actually use that as a view for the shop floor. So as I mentioned just before, this is a demo and we'll go through a typical example of an assembly item where I've created a couple of bill of materials. I'll show you the differences between them. I'll actually give you some really, really easy ways to take a bill of materials that is for a red bike, copy it, take an ingredient off, add a new ingredient on, and actually take that same core bill of materials with a slight change and create a different version of it. In my examples, we'll be using the red bike and the blue bike. And I'll show you along the way what changes I'm going to make so you can see why I'm doing it and the benefit to do that. We'll also look at a manufacturing routing. We talked about it very briefly before, but let's just see what's comprised of, how do you use it. And then we'll take an example through where we'll create a work order for the red bike using a routing and a bill of materials and actually show you what happens when you use the routings to produce a product. And the core benefit of that is you actually put the raw material costs as well as labor and machine recovery costs into the finished product, which in theory means that your cost of goods sold is a more accurate reflection because you've not just got material costs going into COGS, you've actually got a recovery of labor and machine costs. So you've got a more accurate reflection of your margin. So that's a very quick introduction of what the demo is going to have. Now I'll actually step right into it. So I'm going to stop sharing screens for a couple of seconds and then log into NetSuite and get that part of the demo going. So give me 1 second. So hopefully what you can now see on your screen is a red bike. And what in the demo account, what I have is a red bike. It's just the standard assembly item. But with advanced bill of materials, you have the option to add multiple bill of materials. So in the standard bill of materials functionality, which as I mentioned before is going to be phased out, what you would see on the screen is just a screen where you would list the ingredients. And that would be your list of ingredients regardless of which legal entity you're producing the goods in and also which location you're producing it in. As in my example, I've got a bill of materials that I can manufacture this for in Auckland, and I can also manufacture this in Christchurch. The structure of a bill of materials is that a bill of materials has revision, and revisions are quite useful because depending on when I'm manufacturing this product will determine which set of ingredients I'm going to use. And I will take you through the differences between the two revisions here. So in the 2023 revision, a revision in its raw form is a list of ingredients that I'm going to use with quantities and yields to produce one of this product. So to produce this one red bike, I'm going to use all these ingredients and with these components. So to make one red bike, I'm going to use 2 wheels, 1 chain, and as we go through the rest of it. What is also useful is I can control which set of ingredients I use depending on the start and end date. So for the year 2023, this is my set of ingredients. But in 2024, I'm going to use a different set of ingredients. And the big reason for this would be that, let's imagine you know ahead of time that the product you're using today to manufacture the red bike is going to be phased out by a supplier, or you can't get it anymore. And you're being given advance notice that you have to buy a different item to produce the same product. You can actually substitute, you can create a revision that is for next year, or even every 6 months, depends on how often you control your revisions. So in this example here, in 2023, I would use a chain, but I know that in 2024, that product, I can't buy it, I can't manufacture it, I can't have that anymore. So going into 2024, I'm going to make sure that when I produce the red bike, I'm going to use a different chain to make sure that I can still manufacture what I want for the red bike, which I'm selling, and therefore manufacturing. You're not limited necessarily to 1 revision per BOM. What you are limited to is 1 active revision. So you can't have 2 revisions that you go, actually, I want to use revision 2 today and revision 1 tomorrow. You always have 1 active revision against a bill of materials. And as the first one expires, you can now be kicking into using the 2024 one. I'll show you where this kicks in when we create the work order, because the date of production determines which list of ingredients you're going to be using to manufacture the goods. That's how NetSuite controls which revision you're going to use. What we also will look at is the yields, right? So I mentioned much earlier that I know that out of 1 meter of steel, let's say, I'm going to get 85%. So if I need to use a meter, I have to allow an element of scrap when I'm producing this. So it allows you to actually over-issue materials to the work order to make sure that at the end of it, you've got enough in there so you can issue the full quantity. Working in the print industry, we would always allow an element of scrap into what we put on the BOM to make sure that I get out of it at least a single unit that I can give to the product to make it. So that's a very quick introduction of what a bill of materials is. And again, it can be location based. So in the red bike here, just to show you a difference, the reason why these 2 BOMs are different is that actually when I manufacture this item in Christchurch, I don't use brake wire. I use a different version of a brake wire. So for Christchurch, it could be a localized example, but if I was to manufacture this item in China, then I could be using a very different brake wire because I can buy it quicker than I can import it, let's say. So I can use a different product depending on where it's made to still manufacture a red bike. So it allows you the ability to not have 1 set of ingredients across every location you manufacture it. You can actually have a different bill of materials that still makes a red bike, but you might be using a different set of ingredients for whatever reason. Both of those hang off the red bike. And depending on where you raise the work order to manufacture it, will determine which bill of materials and which revision it's going to use. In addition to that, I mentioned manufacturing routing. So manufacturing routing is a way for you to get it through a manufacturing process, but recovering labor and recovering things such as machine costs and overheads. You might have machine running costs, machine overheads. We can all capture those and put them on a routing. A routing can have different operations. So in this case, I've got 1 operation called a production assembly, but you might have a routing that says assembly, production, picking and packing. You might have different labor elements and different charges that you want to recover as this goes through a manufacturing process. For some of the companies that I work for, they will recover the costs of an oven because it's been put in an oven to cook. And then when it's taken out, they're going to do some recovery on the assembly of that product. And then they're going to do another operation called shipping because they want to put those costs either through a labor rate or a machine into the cost of the finished product when it's manufactured. You will also notice that I've got 2 routings. So in some organizations that I've been into, they have lines. So line 1, I can put the red bike through and I can put it through line 2. Now, sometimes line 1 will have a quicker throughput time than line 2. So for line 1, it's going to take me 60 minutes to put it through per unit. But actually on line 2, it will only take 30 minutes because I might have a better machine. I might have more skilled operators on that second line, which means that the cost it will take in terms of time and dollars to put it through line 2 will be significantly quicker than it would be to put it through line 1. There might be a reason why I do that. And because it's a quicker operation, I want to put it to be less cost and less time into the cost of the product when I'm manufacturing it. So that's the reason why you might have multiple routings. Again, if you had a routing attached to the Christchurch bill of materials, then it might take longer to put it through the Christchurch manufacturing facility because they've got less specialized equipment. In this case, the production of the frame, let's say, would take 3 hours instead of 2. You can add that as a real operation, and then you can recover the cost accordingly, depending on how long it physically takes to put it through that process, either in Auckland or in Christchurch or wherever you're getting it manufactured. If you didn't have routings turned on, a bit like this, where you can't recover against different operations in different work centers, the old-fashioned way to recover labor and also machinery, if you want to, is to add, for the bill of materials, I'll just go into it quickly. You would add a item on the bill of materials called labor recovery, but that is just a notional one-off charge that you would put, let's say $50, and if it takes one, goes through at $50 and you produce 10, then it would add $500 into the cost of the manufacturing process. But it's not necessarily as sophisticated as putting it through a routing. A routing allows me to plan work centers, see the capacity on each production line in each location. I can plan things around. That's not part of what I'm showing you today, but that is the key difference of using a routing, where you can actually use a task scheduler to see what work is on which production line and reschedule if you need to, and it can go further than that. So with that said, there's an easy, so if you've got, let's imagine you started selling a blue bike today, but the difference between a blue bike and a red bike in terms of a bill of materials is just the paint color. Instead of going into a new bill of materials and trying to work out what things I need to make to produce a blue bike, I could take the bill of materials for a red bike, which is this, make a copy of it, and we'll do this in real time. So I'll do blue, and I'm restricting this to Auckland. I've now created a blue bike bill of materials, and all I'm now going to do is change the list of ingredients for the blue bike. So this is, because I copied it, this was the red bike's list of ingredients. I can now substitute this, if the only difference is blue paint, and put that in, and I might use 2 liters of that to make one of these. So I'm going to do this first for 2023, and actually for 2024, I still want to produce that blue bike, so I'm going to put that in. Blue paint. Now to link this bill of materials to a blue bike assembly item, all I have to do is to come into the blue bike assembly item and just assign the bill of materials that I've just created. So I didn't spend 2 hours creating a bill of materials from scratch, and some of you will have bill of materials that are maybe 100 lines. So to do that from scratch is quite, it would be quite difficult and actually quite time consuming. This is a very easy way just to quickly create a new bill of materials that is, it's almost like a save as, make a change and then apply that to the other product. And now this is ready for me to use. For the manufacturing process, routings, you would have to, you could in theory do the same thing. It's not going to copy the routings across, but that's in theory how you would take a bill of materials that is pretty generic, take one ingredient off, put one ingredient on, and apply that to a new product that you're selling. So we've gone through the mechanics of what an assembly item is, how we add bill of materials, revision control. Let's actually take the red bike and actually manufacture one and see what happens when we use the bill of materials as an example. And then also, what does that look like at the end in terms of recovery for labor and machine costs?
Hey, Simon, I've got a quick question for you from Gilbert, if that's all right.
Sure.
He's asked, can you track consumption of different materials? That is, brake wire or paint. Could that be consumed, as it were? Example, 1.5 meters is used per BOM, and we have 100 meters in stock. Can and would NetSuite consume and take the wire out of stock?
So what happens is when we create the work order, and we'll go through that now, we'll create the work order for the red bike. And when we release the work order, it will commit the stock that it needs from inventory. Then when you tell the system you manufactured the red bike, it will deduct from inventory what you used. You'll see in here in a moment that if the BOM said 1.5 meters to produce the red bike, but you actually use 3, you can actually key in the actual used quantity to say that I actually used 3 meters instead of 1.5. And when you build the work order, it consumes 3 from stock, not 1.5. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, and I think it's important to note that no one can sell that stock while it's committed in the manufacturing process, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's perfect, man. Thank you.
So on the work order here, there are a couple of ways to do this. If we want to use a routing and start recovering labor from the routings that I showed you earlier, we need to tick the word work in progress. So work in progress is in the sense that when we release the work order, we can actually track the value of work orders in work in progress. If you don't tick work in progress, what all you'll be doing here is using the bill of materials that you've got and taking that to the end and no labor costs. So with work in progress turned on, you can use the routing to recover labor and machinery. If you don't use that, then you would just be recovering the cost of the raw materials to produce the red bike. Because I've talked about routings a lot, I'm going to tick work in progress. This screen is obviously a demo account, but the key things I'm interested in while I'm on here is the entity that I'm building the stock into. Just zoom in slightly, and the location. So once I get the red bike, which is there, there's still nothing there, but the location determines what ingredients we're going to be using. So when I set the location, which is somewhere down here, to Auckland, then it's going to default the list of ingredients. Now, I mentioned before that the production start date determines which set of ingredients we get. So in my previous example, I had 2 revisions, one for 2023, and it uses a set of ingredients. For 2024, it uses a different set of ingredients. So if we look at what the ingredients are now, so I've got this, I'm expecting probably the chain to change, literally to change, when I change the production start date to 2024. So this is how NetSuite knows which revision to use, because when it's being manufactured, that will be the list of ingredients we're going to use to produce this going forwards. If you don't have revisions, you can just have one revision that has no end date, and it will just use the same set of ingredients for the end of time. What can also be done is, if, let's say, for this particular work order, as an example, I don't want to use brake wire, I want to use a different braking material. For this work order on its own, I can choose a different material. Because sometimes you'll get to the manufacturing process and actually, I haven't got enough of brake wire. There's something very similar on the shelf next to it that I do have in stock. To produce this work order for this bike, I'm going to take that off and add the new ingredient on, and therefore I can still continue with the manufacturing process. I'm going to change the date back to 2023 because I'll have enough stock of all the ingredients for this. And yeah, so we go up here. I'm going to turn on work in progress. By default, it's going to choose line 1 because against the assembly item, I get to choose what is my preferred way of manufacturing this in terms of labor and for the routings. So you can see here that against the routings, I've got a preferred. I could, if I wanted to schedule this to line 2, which is here, I could change my mind and put it through line 2. It will default to line 1 because at least it's giving you a default. If for whatever reason the scheduler is coming in and planning this, they will go, actually line 1's full, I'm going to put line 2 because it needs some work, or I need a rush order, I can put it on line 2 because I know it takes half as long, then I can choose line 2. Again, line 2 determines the operations and also how much time it takes to produce one through the machine or through the work center. So that's the main reason why I do that. So I'm gonna, and in terms of the stock commitment, when I release a work order, releasing the work order will commit quantities here to the work order. So as Andrew mentioned there, when a stock item gets committed, it can't be used for anything else. If I'm committing 2 of these and something else needs it, well, that's a bit tough. There's a decision to be made. Do you take away the stock from this work order to give it to another one? That's a different process. But when I release a work order, it is going to be committing each of these ingredients to this work order that I can then use in the manufacturing process. Let's close these down. It is a demo account, so it's taking a little time. Okay, cool. So now I've released the work order. What will happen is it's committed the stock of each of these ingredients. A note here for the red paint. I deliberately set this item as a non-stocked item. So sometimes you'll have things that you're going to consume in the manufacturing process that you just buy in, but you never stock them. So screws, nuts, and bolts, they're very typical things that need to go on the bill of materials, but you buy them in, but you're not physically you're not accounting for the amount of stock that's actually on the shelf. So for paint, when you receive 1 million liters of paint, are you going to stock them in inventory and store them on the balance sheet? You could argue yes and no. Nuts and bolts, probably not. But the idea here is that I've committed no paint because it's not a stocked item. I've just used this as a non-stocked item that I will buy, but I will be consuming it and therefore adding cost when I bring it into the cost of this. So with work in progress turned on, you get these 2 buttons here. So you can, in theory, issue the stock to the floor, which means it will go into work in progress, and then also enter the time you've done. So you could issue the stock, which will take it out of your stock system and put it into work in progress. And entering a completion is telling the system that it's gone through operation 1 and 2. So let's imagine it's just finished its manufacturing process. I'm logging my time against the operation, so that will add the recovery in. If I don't want to do 2 separate things of issuing the stock and then also issuing time, my default would be to say that once I've built the thing, it's gone through its manufacturing process, I've consumed all the materials, and I've actually made a red bike, I'm going to use enter completion with backflush. It sounds a mouthful, that can be renamed, but it's basically telling the work order that I've done exactly what you've asked me to do. I have produced one of these red bikes. As we go down here, NetSuite will actually ask you to tell me the operations you've completed. So if work center 1 is doing their bit, they would do I've done production. If I've got a second work center that does something else, you could then say actually I'm completing operation 2. This item is not in stock until every operation on that list of operations is complete, because if you've got 10 people doing 10 different things, the last operation will be the bit where it puts the red bike into stock and also flush all the recoveries into the cost of the finished goods. Because if you had the red bike in stock after the first operation, but there's still 10 left, well, it's not really true, is it? It's still work in progress until the last operation has been completed. I'm going to enter the completed quantity. And what NetSuite will do is for each of the components, 1 times the standard BOM will be the number of components you're going to consume. If I did in real life actually use 10 meters of brake wire, and I'm not going to use 4 wheels, but I'm going to maybe use 2 meters of chain. This is where you're telling the system how much stock you physically use to manufacture the item. So this therefore makes my stock on hand more correct, because I've told the system I overconsumed what the BOM told me to. In terms of operations, the amount of money going into the cost of the product is 60 minutes of labor and 60 minutes of machine time. If for whatever reason it took an hour and a half to put it through the oven, through the production facility, I could change the machine runtime to 90. Oops, that's wrong number. And then set the labor runtime, 90, and then it took me 2 hours, these minutes. By changing the default time to produce one of these items, it's to 90 and 120, it's going to increase the cost of the product when it's built, because I'm now adding more labor and more machine time into the cost of the product, because that's what happens. Sometimes people will just use the standard 60 minutes and just let it be there. And if it's 5 minutes here or there, it's up to them. But if it did take significantly longer, what I'm showing you is you can issue more time in terms of machine and labor to increase the cost it physically incurs when you're producing it. So I've added the time, I've changed the components of how much I used. I'm therefore going to hit save. And what we should see in a minute is the projected value of this product is now $452.50, of which we can show you where is that cost coming from. So that's the value of the red bike. It's clearing work in progress, but also crediting stock because it's consumed the raw materials to make something worth that. As we go down here, we're seeing that stock in hand, we're clearing work in progress and also eating stock. When we get down to the bottom, this is where we're doing a labor recovery. So behind the routing, I've got a labor item which posts to a recovery account, and then the machine time that I'm capturing is also posting to a recovery account behind the scenes of the routing. So this is where we get the $300 worth of labor and machine recovery. And then, as I mentioned, when you create the work order with work in progress turned on, you've now got a value sitting in work in progress. When you build the work order and issue the stock and say you've finished, it's clearing work in progress, consuming the materials, and actually putting something into stock that is the combination of the two. And that's pretty much it in terms of the assembly items with the BOMs and the revisions, and also manufacturing routings with this. And yeah, that's, I think, the demo I've got prepared finished, Andrew. I'm happy to take any questions. We still got a bit of time left, so I'm happy to take questions or revisit things if things aren't clear.
Yep. Thanks, Simon. We do have another question from Gil this time, and he asked a little while ago. Sorry, but you were on a roll, and I didn't want to interrupt you. But the question is, could you commit stock before it's released? And the example he's given is that there are times when they're waiting on one part to arrive to release the job, but find that when that part arrives, there might be another piece of stock that is required, but it's subsequently been taken. So it's like a juggling act of trying to get all the pieces together to assemble the thing, but it's going out the door. I
think, yeah, traditionally, if a planned work order, especially if you're planning it ahead of time, a planned work order is not going to be committing stock. So if I planned it, we'll show it as planned just to follow the story. But a planned work order could be something like this, and you can see here nothing's been committed. It's not even been back because a planned work order may or may not come off. I might be deciding these are all the work orders that I've got as planned today. You could, in theory, choose to release work order 1, which was created today, but then you might actually release work order 8 before you release work order 1. Planned work orders are there because, especially if you're using things such as MRP, which is going to generate work orders for the future, you might leave them as planned until you're ready to schedule them in your scheduling system. So planned work orders, not really. They're designed to put the intent to produce something. Only when you release them will it commit stock. Now, if you did have an issue where you released it and another work order got stock, you can use something called reallocate items, which allows you to pinch the stock that NetSuite allocated to the first work order and actually take it away and actually issue it to work order number 10. So that would be the only really way to do it. But planned work orders, as you can see here, it's the intent to build, and when I'm ready to release, when I release it, that's the act of committing stock, or even going into back order if you don't have it. Note that you can't build a work order unless all the ingredients have at least one commitment. So if you had enough to produce 2 and the work order was 10, NetSuite would allow you to produce the 2 but not 10 because you don't have enough stock.
Gotcha.
So yeah, it's an unfortunate note to that, sorry, but we might be able to find ways just to mitigate that for you, Gil.
Yeah. Thanks, Simon. It's good to know. Any other questions? Yes, I've got a question from Marie, and that is, can you confirm that there is still no ability to add negative items in a BOM to return items to stock rather than consume them? That's interesting.
It is it's a question I get asked a lot, and you can't, NetSuite BOMs don't allow negative stock. So you couldn't in theory have and we can try it in real time. I always get told off by the revision that you can't have a negative line. I do know what you mean, because you're trying to substitute when you're trying to substitute one off to then put something back on. So we might to put the break wire on again. Let's say is that one? Yeah. So it doesn't allow negatives. We're quite interested to hear the use case of what the use case of why you would want to take something off that physically isn't in it. Because what you're traditionally for the bill of materials and the revisions is I need to have at least one of these or even half of something to make something. But if you're taking something off nothing, then that's the logic why NetSuite's in theory throwing this issue. There might be workarounds that we can discuss of how you do that. But yeah, we can potentially take that offline and arrange, look at the use case of why you do that and how we solve it.
Marie did generously say she was happy to share her issues at any time.
I'll show you that. I mean, more than likely have a chat and we'll see what the business process is and how we can arrange.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. I've got another question from Carla. They're rolling in now, Simon, which is great. Can a revision expiry be based on consumption of one ingredient instead of a date?
It used to be the case. So with standard BOMs, you could have the expiry of the ingredient. That's the way it used to work. But in this method, the whole thing has an expiry date. So if one particular ingredient did expire, which in theory my other example did produce, where the chain, I know that I can't buy this chain, and at the end of 2023, I have to have a new revision that allows me to buy a different chain. So in the old way of doing things, you could. I don't have a screenshot available. In the old-fashioned way, you could have the revision control at component level. In the advanced bill of materials world, that is now driven to the whole revision. I don't like giving bad answers, but it used to be at component level. Now it's not. It's now at revision level, which is why I've got the second revision for 2022.
So if you had, say, 4 wheels left in stock and you've just built 2 bikes and you know there's no way to get more of those types of wheels, there's not a way to trigger a new revision then?
You'd have to create a new one, or for the particular work order where you're going to use 2 of wheel 1 and 2 of wheel 2, then you can control that at the work order level, knowing that you've got to use the last 2 of the old code, and then you would add an extra line that recovers the stock of the new wheel.
Okay. Thanks, Simon. We've got another question from Andrea, last one so far. Can you have a work order, and I haven't read this yet, can you have a work order which has one operation but goes for more than one and produces a number of finished goods, but not the entire quantity of the work order?
So I've got an example. So a work order will only ever produce one finished good. That's always been the way NetSuite works. So for one work order, it's a red bike, and that's the red bike. Okay. Unless you've got unless you have phantoms, which allows you to, in theory, let's imagine you use the green bike to make a red bike. So you've got the BOM of the red bike and then the BOM of the green bike. That in theory is an easy way to make the green bike at the same time as the red bike. And what you're left with is a red bike at the end, if that makes sense.
Perhaps can I give you Andrew's example?
Yeah.
So for example, a work order for 10,000 units of shampoo bottles, and in one day they've made 2,500.
Yeah.
With 7,500 to go. Can we have 2,500 units sitting in the finished goods stock, or do we need to wait for the entire work order to be completed?
Okay. That's a definite yes, you can. So for this work order here, I'm going to produce 10. So actually, let's release it. So in the example there, I've got a work order for 10,000, or in this case 10. I'm going to produce 2 today, so I'll build 2, and then in 4 days' time, when I've built the 8, I'll build the 8 when I've built them. So yes, you can do that. So if we release the work order for 10, hopefully I've got enough stock in to make 10. So in this case, yeah, I do.
Okay.
So I'll enter the completion. So I'll make 2 now, which tells the system I've actually made 2. So I can do, I've made 2 of them. That's all good. And then, so I put 2 of the 10 that I need, and actually tomorrow or the day after I make an extra 3, I'll come back into the same work order and then tell the system that I've made an additional 3. So what that looks like now is on the work order itself, I've got manufacturing day 1, I produced 2, manufacturing day 2, I produced 3. And I'm left with what looks like this. Does that answer the question?
I hope so. It makes sense to me. I think the answer is yes.
Cool. And you don't need advanced bill of materials to do that. Standard work order process. So, or even routings and stuff. That's the way standard NetSuite works. One work order for 1,000. I could in theory build 1 at a time if I wanted to have 1,000 work order completions or work order builds. That's nothing new as part of advanced BOMs. That's pretty much a standard feature throughout the work order process in general.
Great. Awesome. Question from Marie. Is turning on the advanced bill of materials all you need to do to make it live? Or is there anything else that we need to do? She's asked, I assume you need to set up the routes as well.
So routings are
separate.
So yeah, separate. So if you were on standard bill of materials today, all you would have to do, and Liberate actually did a blog post on this. So the steps of how you do that are pretty straightforward, but I think in enable features, if you're on the standard BOMs to go to the new ones, all you have to do is turn on advanced bill of materials. I was a bit too quick there. So I went to enable features, items and inventory, and then I went to advanced bill of materials.
Yep.
In terms of manufacturing and so the routings and stuff, I think that's part of WIP routing. It's very much linked into advanced bill of materials, but it is a separate, I guess, licensing option.
Yeah, and you don't need it.
But
for the BOMs. Certainly helps.
It's not dependent on routings to work. Advanced bill of materials without recovering labor on the routings, they're 2 separate pieces, but they kind of interlink. If you don't want to use routings, then you could just add a notional charge to the revision to recover labor. So you might have a labor charge on there, but it's not going to push through work centers, recover, it's not going to be as sophisticated as a routing.
Yeah. And to enable advanced bill of materials, we'd suggest people do that in the sandbox first.
Yeah, turn it on in sandbox, see what it does, because what it will in theory do would be to take your single BOM and basically create a revision, a bill of materials with a revision. So that's what it's done. I've seen it before where you go from a single BOM on a product that is listed by components. When you turn it on, it basically creates a bill of materials and a revision of the same name. So it'll just literally create one of these for you. I guess the benefit to that is actually if you wanted to add an additional, if you didn't have the ability to have multiple bill of materials depending on location, let's say, or if it's made in China as opposed to the UK, then you could now start implementing that as a business change where you can have different lists of ingredients depending on which location or even which legal entity is producing the goods for you.
Great, thanks, Simon. Last one, I think, from Chloe, and that is, can you do a BOM in cascade? Like BOM 1 have another BOM 2 inside of it. So when you create the work order, it will show all the materials.
Yes, so we have a feature called Phantoms that I can show you actually. Yeah, I can probably show it to you. So the example isn't going to be that great because I'm using red bikes and blue bikes, but if I put the blue bike on here, And then I go into the assembly. I think there's a feature called use phantom, and that will allow me to have phantom. Mark subassembly does phantom. Let's see that. I think this is the answer to your question, Chloe. So if I raise a work order now, just do this one. That's fine. Yeah, so the answer to that question there, Chloe, I've added the blue byte, which is an assembled item, onto the bill of materials of another assembled item. Could it list the ingredients that I need to make this? So the benefit of using what you've just described there is you would have one work order that lists all of the ingredients to produce a red bike, even if it's got sub-assemblies, which means that you can consume as you go. So you'll pick all of these, you'll make one of those, and actually when you tell NetSuite you've built the red bike, you've actually consumed as you've gone. If you don't have phantoms, which what we've just described there, you'd have to have a work order to produce the blue bike, can put it into stock, and then you build the work order for the red bike, knowing that you've got to consume the blue bike as part of the work order for the red bike, if that makes sense. Blue and red is confusing as hell, but you get the idea here that if you have phantom, you would not have the ingredients on the BOM, you would just have blue bike. You would have to manufacture that on a separate work order, put it into stock, and then when you build the red bike, you'll consume the blue bike, which you've just manufactured. This takes that away, and it allows you to consume all the ingredients to make the blue bike, and then when you build the red bike, you're consuming as you go, not having two separate work order tickets.
Yeah,
there's a feature called phantom, which is a pretty neat feature. It does take away, especially if you've got 10 or 15 sub-assemblies, it avoids 15 work orders when you've got one. And the way you do that is just to designate that it is marks sub-assemblies as phantom.
Nice. No, I get that. So no doubt that the team here do as well. Another question from Rebecca, and that is, when multiple batches are produced from one manufacturing run, if actual componentry used is slightly more than what the BOM states, is there a way to assign the real cost to all the units across all batches? We find that when we do work order completions, it's not easy to then update the cost of the initial batches.
So when this is not a lot number example by any means, but let's imagine this was, because if this was a lot number product, you would have to punch in what lot number you produced. So if you did if you made lot 1, and this is one completion against that, all of the entries here, so 2 times 6, whatever, that would go into the cost of that lot, because NetSuite knows that to make lot number 1, these are all the ingredients and these are all the operations that were involved to make that. So the cost should be reflected from just issuing the correct amount of materials and the correct amount of labor. I don't know if you found that it's not doing that, but we can definitely have a look at that to see if that, and it also depends maybe on your costing method. If you're average, well, the average cost could fluctuate a little bit, but if you're lot costed, then in theory, the cost of the ingredients that you're using to produce lot 1 and the labor to produce lot 1 should give you the true cost of the lot. If for whatever reason you define that, someone said 6, but I used 20, the most logical way, if it allows you to do that, is to edit the completion that you use to produce lot 1 and then just update the ingredients. So the stock is reflected accurately, and also the labor and the machine overheads.
Thanks, Simon. I'm not sure if we entered that one. I mean, that made sense. Oh no, Rebecca's saying, okay, thanks. Great. Awesome.
If it doesn't make sense, we can have a chat, but
yeah.
From the face of the question, it kind of makes sense just to edit the thing that put lot 1 into stock. If you didn't want to do that, you could in theory do a stock adjustment where you adjust out lot 1 at $50, and because you know what it should cost, then you could adjust it back in you could adjust it back in at a different value, but you'd be writing off the difference to an adjustment account.
Gotcha. Thanks, Simon. I think we'll wrap it up there, mate.
Cool.
I think today's got the most Q&A we've ever had on a webinar, so I'm really stoked. So
more my presentation skills rather than anything else.
No, I think you've prompted a lot of people to think into how they're using BOMs right now and ask those questions. So that's great.
We hope this video gave you the information you were after. If you have any further questions, get in touch with us using the links in the description.